Chapter 11. The air in Eden was thick with the scent of ripened fruit and the perfume of blooming jasmine, but now something new wove itself into the wind, something golden, something forbidden. The garden swayed in a hush. The leaves did not rustle. The river did not murmur. It was as if all creation held its breath. Eve stood before the tree. The branches curled like arms stretched toward the sky, bearing fruit that glowed with a beauty unlike any other in the garden. It was perfect. It was untouched. "Yea, hath God said?" The voice was like music, smooth, low, a melody that begged to be finished. A voice like warm honey trickling through the air, rich and enthralling. Eve turned. She did not gasp. She did not step back. She should have, but the sight before her was too enchanting. A serpent, if it could even be called that. This was not the creeping, slithering thing of the earth. This creature flew, its body gilded with the radiance of burnished gold, its wings outstretched like woven fire, bending sunlight into ribbons. Its eyes, jewel-like and knowing, gleamed with intelligence. Eve's breath caught. The creature spoke. She blinked. Nothing in Eden spoke but Adam, the Son of God, and the angels. Nothing except this. "Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden." It was not a question. It was an invitation. The serpent coiled itself along a low branch, its wings folding elegantly. It moved with a grace unlike anything she had ever seen, like liquid sunlight poured into a living form. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it plucked a fruit from the tree. Eve's eyes widened. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from wonder. How? God had not given the beasts of the field the power of speech, let alone understanding. And yet, this creature spoke, not with mere words, but with something deeper. It knew her, knew what she had been thinking, knew she had wondered, knew she had questioned. It knew. Her fingers brushed her lips in thought, in intrigue. The creature tilted its head, slow, deliberate, mesmerizing. And then, it smiled. She had never seen such a thing before, an animal smiling, and yet it was the most gracious, most inviting expression she had ever beheld. "You are lovely beyond measure," it purred, its voice both a whisper and a song. "The most exquisite among creation." A warmth bloomed in her chest. She had been praised before, by Adam, by the Son of God himself. But this was different. This voice admired. This voice revered. A soft, enthralling laugh curled from the creature's throat. "What a joy it must be to walk as you do, to move with such grace. Even I, with all my beauty, cannot compare." The words should not have meant anything, but they did. Eve's lips parted slightly. She glanced at the tree, then back at the golden being before her. "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden," she said lightly, almost playfully, as if they were merely speaking as friends. The creature nodded as if it had already known her answer, yet had still longed to hear it from her lips. "But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden," she hesitated, looking at the fruit in its hand. "God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die." The words had always been enough, until now. The serpent laughed, not mockingly, not cruelly, but gently, softly, reassuringly. "Ye shall not surely die." The words melted into the air, smooth as silk, rich as golden honey. Eve inhaled sharply. A shiver, not of fear but of curiosity, raced down her spine. The creature's jewel-like eyes locked onto hers. "For God doth know." It stepped forward, gliding across the branch, weaving through the air as if it were swimming through light. "That in the day ye eat thereof," it lifted the fruit, turned it, held it to the light. The skin gleamed, perfect, as if the very heavens had crafted it by hand. Then your eyes shall be opened. The word sent a pulse through her. Something deep inside of her stirred. A feeling she had never known before, longing, not for the fruit, not even for knowledge, but for something more. The creature's voice softened, just above a whisper. And ye shall be as gods. Her breath shuddered. As gods. The garden had never felt small until this moment, and she, who had always known everything she needed to know, had never realized that there was more. Something beyond, something hidden, something kept from them. Her gaze drifted back to the fruit, now resting effortlessly in the creature's palm. It was not dangerous. It was not forbidden. Not in the way she had thought. It was waiting. For her. The serpent smiled. Eve exhaled slowly. The world around them had never been so silent, and she had never been so captivated. The fruit gleamed like a captured sunrise, its skin taut, glowing with a luster that seemed to hum with something ancient, something hidden. Eve's breath was shallow. She did not reach for it, not yet, but her eyes lingered. The serpent's wings stirred, shifting the golden light of the garden into rivers of warmth that danced across her skin. Your eyes, he murmured, tilting his head, his voice honeyed silk, are full of questions. A smile curled at the edges of his lips. Good. Eve had always had questions, not doubts, but curiosity, more about the stars, more about the rivers, more about the language of the beasts and the song of the wind. And now, before her, rested a key, a gateway to something deeper, something beyond the veil of what she had known. God has given you so much, the serpent mused, voice rich as molten gold, and yet, not all. Eve's brow furrowed. He has given us everything. Everything? The serpent let the word hover, let it breathe. Then why is there one thing withheld? Eve hesitated. She had heard the question before, but not quite like this. And ye shall be as gods. Her breath hitched. The gods. The serpent's wings stretched slightly, golden light cascading around him. You were meant for more, he whispered. Why should you be satisfied with less? Eve inhaled sharply. Her gaze flickered to the fruit. So much of her world had been given, but now, she realized, she had never taken. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the fruit's skin, smooth, cool, alive. She did not die. The serpent's lips curved. You see? Eve grasped it. For the first time in all of creation, Eve held her own destiny. She lifted it to her lips and took a bite. The taste exploded across her tongue. It was knowledge, sharp and golden. The serpent's eyes gleamed, and deep in the abyss. Lucifer smiled. The moment the fruit passed her lips, Eve gasped. It was not like any other fruit she had ever tasted. Sweet, yes, but not in the way of the figs or the golden pears that grew in the eastern groves. This was deeper, richer, layered with flavors her tongue had never known. It was as if the very essence of the earth had been distilled into this single bite, singing on her palate with something more than mere taste. Something awakening. A warmth spread through her, coiling like liquid sunlight in her chest, like a vine unfurling its first tender leaves toward the heavens. Her mind seemed to sharpen, her senses stretching beyond their previous boundaries. She could hear the wind, not just the rush of it through the trees, but the way it curled around each leaf, whispering secrets she had never stopped to notice before. The world had not changed, but somehow she had. Her breath shuddered, and her fingers tightened around the fruit. She turned her gaze toward the garden, toward the rivers and the valleys and the skies painted in deepening gold. It had always been beautiful, perfect. And yet, how little she had truly seen. How little they had both truly understood. A rush of joy swelled in her chest. Adam. He had to know. This was not a loss. This was a gift. The fruit had not harmed her. The words of the serpent had been true. She was still Eve, but more. She could already imagine the look in Adam's eyes when he saw her, when she told him of the knowledge she had gained. This would change everything. Their world would expand, their understanding deepen, their joy become limitless. She had to share it with him. With a heartbeat light as air, she reached up and plucked another piece of fruit from the tree, then another, until her arms cradled the treasure like a harvest of the gods. She turned, and for a moment, just before she ran, she glanced back toward the creature in the branches. The serpent was watching her, smiling. She smiled back, and then she ran. Adam exhaled, stepping back from his work. The day had softened into a golden hush, the sun beginning its descent, but not yet kissing the horizon. The sky was streaked with the first wisps of evening violet, stretching lazily above the treetops. The air was thick with the scent of ripened fruit, of cool earth, of the distant aroma of jasmine where the vines clung to the arbors. The animals lay nearby, their breathing slow, their eyes half-lidded in contentment. The lions stretched, their great golden bodies gleaming as they rested in the grass, unbothered by the gazelles dozing just beyond them. The birds murmured soft songs in the branches above, their melodies a lullaby to the approaching night. Everything was as it should be. And yet, Adam rolled his shoulders, his gaze lifting toward the trees. Eve had been gone longer than he expected. Not long enough to worry, not really. And yet, his brow furrowed slightly. She wasn't supposed to leave his side. The angels had cautioned them both, stay together. There was safety in unity, in their shared devotion to God's command. They had spoken of the adversary, of the one who watched, who lurked in the unseen places. If he came, they knew what to say. Adam exhaled, shaking his head. He was being foolish. They had rehearsed this 100 times over. If the enemy came with his lies, they would stand. Eve was strong. She loved the Almighty. She would never... Adam! His name. It rang through the air, bright as laughter, urgent as a river breaking through stone. He turned, and there she was, Eve. His breath caught for a moment, as it always did. She was beautiful. No, beautiful was too small a word. Her hair, dark as the shadows of deep waters, tumbled over her shoulders in waves, catching the fading sunlight in golden threads. Her eyes, bright as dawn, shone with something he could not yet name, something new and breathless. Her skin, kissed by the warmth of Eden, glowed as if she had just stepped from the river. She was light. She was music. She was his Eve, and she was running to him. His heart swelled, joy rising in him like a tide. But then he saw her arms, full, brimming with fruit. The fruit. His body tensed. She stopped just before him, breathless, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. Her lips parted to speak. And time stopped. The world held its breath. A single moment stretched into eternity. The sun dipped lower, its light casting long shadows across the ground. The river, the trees, the creatures, all silent, as if all creation was watching, waiting. Eve smiled. And then she spoke, and the world would never be the same. The moment Eve spoke, Adam's ears began to ring. A high, sharp pressure, like the sound of a distant storm rolling across the hills. The kind of sound one hears in the moments before lightning strikes. His breath caught. His body locked. The world blurred, as if the very air had thickened. Eve stood before him, his Eve, her face alight with an unnatural glow, her hands filled with the fruit that should never have been touched. She was smiling. She was radiant. And she was speaking. Her words tumbled forward in a breathless rush, each syllable a melody of exhilaration and triumph. She spoke of wisdom, of knowledge, of a world suddenly expanded before her eyes. She spoke of the serpent, a beautiful creature, its body gilded in golden light, its wings vast and shimmering, moving not upon the ground but through the air, soaring, speaking, eating as men do. Adam could hardly breathe. She had eaten. His mind reeled. She had eaten. His heart pounded against his ribs, its rhythm erratic, wild. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the sound of her voice even as she continued, telling him how she felt no death, only life, no darkness, only exhilaration. It was like a dream, a nightmare he could not wake from. His legs felt weak. He wanted to speak, but his tongue was heavy in his mouth. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the weight of something deeper than sorrow. It was as if a panorama of memories unfolded before his eyes. The first moment he had awakened, his soul drawn from the dust by the breath of the Almighty. The first thing he had seen, her, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, his Eve, the one whom God himself had placed at his side, the one who made paradise complete. How could he have everything in Eden, and yet without her, have nothing? His breath shuddered. Eve stepped closer. She was so beautiful. The glow of the setting sun caught in her dark hair, setting it ablaze in strands of gold. Her eyes, those eyes that had always held the reflection of his own soul, now burned with something new, something he could not name. A part of him wanted to run, to flee to the tree of life, to fall upon his face and beg for mercy. But he could not, because she was here, and her arms were full of death. Adam swallowed. His throat was dry, raw. Eve. She stepped forward, her bare feet soundless upon the grass. She took his hands, pressing the fruit into his palms. Her fingers were trembling, not with fear, but with urgency. "Adam," she whispered, "I was wrong to fear." He looked down at the fruit. It was warm. He could still see the place where her teeth had pierced its flesh. A tremor ran through him. She lifted his hands, urging him, pleading, "I feel wonderful. I feel alive. It was not as we thought. There is no harm in it. The serpent was right. He knew. He knows." Adam's vision blurred again. She had been deceived. A struggle tore through his mind like a whirlwind, pulling at the edges of his reason, his soul. "This is the foe," he rasped. "The one we were warned against." Eve shook her head, her dark curls bouncing in the fading light. "But Adam, I am still here. I have not died." Her voice was pleading, but it was not the desperation of fear. It was desperation to make him understand. "I feel no signs of his displeasure," she continued. "I feel as I imagine the angels feel." Adam's heart clenched violently. The angels. His mind flashed with memories of Gabriel, of Cassiel, of their solemn warnings, their radiant sorrow. They knew. They knew. Adam closed his eyes, but the darkness behind his lids could not shield him from the truth. She had eaten. The deed was done. The weight of eternity pressed against his chest. He knew what must happen now. The Almighty had spoken. She must die. His Eve, his very soul, would perish. A sob built in his throat. How could he let it be? How could he watch her waste away, watch the breath leave her body, watch the light fade from those eyes that had always reflected the sunrise of his heart? He could not. He would not. His fingers tightened around the fruit. He knew what this meant. He understood perfectly. Eve had transgressed the command, had stepped beyond the boundary set by the hand of God himself. And now she was lost. Lost to the God who made her. And lost to him, unless he joined her. The thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. If she must die, he would die with her. He could not live in Eden without her. She was a part of him, his rib, his heart, his life. Without her, he was dust. Adam inhaled sharply, lifting his eyes to hers. Her face was expectant, hopeful, glowing with the thrill of discovery. She did not understand, but he did. He saw the abyss yawning before them, felt the weight of eternity tipping toward ruin. But still, he could not let her go alone. His jaw tightened. He turned the fruit in his palm, feeling its weight, the smoothness of its skin. Eve exhaled softly, watching him, waiting. He looked at her. One last time. The first time he had seen her, his heart had sung with a joy he had never known. Now, it broke with a sorrow he had never imagined. He lifted the fruit to his lips, and he bit.